At the beginning, the scene showed a school building, where a boy and a girl were standing together. The girl expressed that she was happy he had sent her the letter, addressing him as Otirai-kun, but immediately followed up with an apology. She explained that although they were friends, she believed it was not the right time to move forward. With a tense expression, she apologized again and then ran away. The boy stood there in confusion, repeating the name Otirai in disbelief. He then shouted internally that his name was Koganei and angrily questioned who Otirai even was, wondering who that person could be and whether the girl knew someone by that name. He reflected that this outcome was the result of his own mistake in assuming that she was interested in him. He remembered that she had suddenly called him after class, only to reject his confession. While walking away, he resolved to find another girl who was even better than her. At the moment he made that promise to himself from the bottom of his heart, he was suddenly run over by a car. Blood splattered through the air, and the scene abruptly shifted. The next scene showed the marquis' eldest son, Theodore Goldberg, who reflected that he had been reincarnated. Theodore acknowledged that he did not fully understand the details, but it was apparently a world of medieval fantasy. Theodore then realized that he had been reborn as the handsome eldest son of a marquis, which he interpreted as being born on the winner's side of life. Feeling grateful, Theodore thanked God. Theodore reasoned that since he had been reincarnated into another world, cheat skills should naturally exist, as that was common for reincarnated people. Theodore became certain that he possessed one. He recalled that in common scenarios, people could view their unique skills and abilities by opening a status window. Theodore remembered attempting to do this when he was a baby, but it had failed due to poor pronunciation. This time, however, Theodore attempted it again by calling out for the status to open. Theodore was stunned when nothing happened. At that moment, Kevin spoke up, asking what kind of game young Master Theodore had been playing. Startled, Theodore reacted in embarrassment and acknowledged Kevin, realizing that Kevin had heard everything. Theodore brushed it off, thinking that even if the status window did not work, it must mean that Theodore possessed sorcery powers. Theodore confidently decided to live life to the fullest using these magical cheat powers and declared his desire to learn magic. Kevin responded that Theodore was too young to learn magic and explained that in order to join the ritual of the great temple of the royal capital, one had to be at least 10 years old. Theodore internally panicked and demanded at least flying magic, but quickly realized that he felt no surges of power within his body. When nothing happened, Theodore concluded that he must be a swordsman. Determined, Theodore decided to master the sword and become the greatest swordsman using his cheat skills. The scene shifted to Kevin demonstrating a sword swing while Theodore lay on the ground. Kevin explained that it had only been a light swing, leaving Theodore shocked. Theodore could not believe that he had lost even in sword fighting and angrily questioned how he could lose to someone like Kevin. Kevin jokingly remarked that Theodore's words were hurting his feelings. Theodore then stood back up, determined not to give up, believing that there had to be a special technique hidden within him. Theodore attacked Kevin again, only to end up on the ground once more. Theodore realized that nothing had happened and reluctantly concluded that cheat abilities might not exist after reincarnation. Still unwilling to give up, Theodore decided that if combat and magic were not options, then domestic administration would be his path. Theodore planned to invent technology using knowledge from his previous civilized life, believing that medieval times would lack such advancements. However, Kevin soon opened a refrigerator and offered Theodore ice cream. Theodore then noticed various modern conveniences, including a bathroom, fan, gas induction stove, and maids cooking. Theodore was shocked by how advanced the world was and realized that there was no opportunity to show off his previous knowledge. He observed that these conveniences were known as mage products, which were similar to electronic devices. Even underwear such as bras and panties existed in this world, and Theodore noted that maids secretly washed and dried them where no one could see. Theodore was later shown staring at the maids' underwear and thinking that they could not hide such things from him, especially when he played hide-and-seek with Kevin. Theodore concluded that he did not possess any cheat related to domestic administration either. Theodore placed the underwear on his head and questioned what kind of world he had reincarnated into. Theodore then decided that he would follow in his father's footsteps and become a marquis capable of managing an estate. Reflecting on his past life, Theodore admitted that he had been an idiot. Holding the underwear, Theodore swore that he would become a great heir to a great marquis, even without cheat abilities, while still believing that his powers would someday awaken. At that moment, Kevin found Theodore, startling him. Theodore declared that Kevin had dared to enter a sacred sanctuary, prompting Kevin to laugh and praise Theodore as a true man for hiding in such an inappropriate place. Both Theodore and Kevin imagined maids wearing the underwear, but they were suddenly interrupted when a maid appeared. Frightened, Theodore and Kevin were later punished, with Kevin being ordered to reflect on his actions for a while. Theodore internally apologized to Kevin. Later that night, a carriage was shown crossing a bridge toward a palace. Kevin rode a horse alongside the carriage, remarking that it had been a while since he had last seen them. Theodore then reunited with his father, running toward him and expressing gratitude for being invited. Theodore's father lifted him up and commented on how much he had grown. A maid praised Theodore as an avid learner, particularly skilled in mathematics, calling him a prodigy. Theodore's father expressed his anticipation for Theodore's future accomplishments while patting his head. Theodore smiled and reflected that he was mentally still a senior high school student, believing that he would grow into an ordinary person. Despite that, Theodore silently promised to one day discover his cheat skill. Theodore's father laughed and advised him not to push himself too hard, wishing for Theodore to grow into a healthy and vigorous man. Theodore felt grateful for having such a great father, though he sensed that his father seemed tired. Theodore then reunited with his mother, who remarked on how well he had grown. Theodore noticed that his mother looked exhausted and skinny and asked if she had eaten breakfast. Theodore's mother reassured him while kneeling down and hugging him, tearfully promising to protect him no matter what. Theodore became even more worried, sensing that something was wrong. Theodore's father dismissed her concerns, insisting that no harm would come to Theodore. Theodore's mother hesitated but remained anxious, fearing for Theodore's future. Confused and alarmed, Theodore swore to himself that he would discover his cheat ability and use it to protect his own life. Theodore thought that this was supposed to be his daily life after reincarnation, living with a cheat skill. However, Theodore felt that something strange was going on around him. Theodore's father reassured Serena, stating that everything was all right and that Theodore was just fine. Theodore's mother, Serena, responded anxiously that things could not continue like this and worried that someday something might happen. Theodore's father suggested that they should simply get rid of the fortune teller. With a tense expression, Theodore's mother shouted that this place had been stuck in a bad mood and that she had been forced to get an abortion because of it. Still tense, Serena repeated that if this situation continued, they might lose Theodore as well. Theodore's father shouted in disbelief, questioning whether the only way to save Theodore was to hand over the saint's tiara, refusing to believe such nonsense. Theodore's mother shouted back in fear, asking what they would do if the prediction came true. Serena grabbed Theodore's father's hand and begged him to give the fortune teller the tiara for the sake of Theodore. Theodore's father refused, stating that the family heirloom was a gift from his own father. Theodore internally panicked, realizing the situation was serious, and reflected that he never knew his mother had gone through an abortion. At that moment, an old woman entered with a child and shouted that it was not the time for the two of them to be arguing. The old woman warned that if this continued, young Master Theodore would have no choice but to face the calamity, and she questioned whether they intended to oppose the oracles of God. The old woman then shouted at Serena, urging her to stop wasting time arguing with her husband and to act before it was too late. The old woman demanded to know which was more important, the heirloom or her son's life. Serena tightly grabbed Theodore's father's hand and pleaded with him once more. Theodore's father hesitated in frustration. The scene then showed Theodore near Kevin, where Theodore asked Kevin for a favor and whispered something into Kevin's ear. Kevin listened carefully. Theodore then walked toward the old woman and addressed her, stating that he had heard something bad would happen to him in the future and asked what exactly those bad things were. The old woman was stunned. At that moment, Theodore's mother hugged Theodore tightly and begged him not to worry, assuring him that she was there to protect him. Theodore reassured his mother that everything would be okay and hugged her back. Theodore then asked his father to accompany his mother for a while. The old woman introduced herself as Tara, stating that it was an honor to meet young Master Theodore and that she was a fortune teller. Theodore again asked what bad things were going to happen to him. Tara corrected Theodore by stating that she had a name and told him not to worry, promising that she would try her best to prevent his destiny, but only after receiving the saint's tiara as compensation. Theodore angrily questioned whether Tara was deaf and demanded for the third time to know what kind of calamity would happen to him. Tara hesitated and explained that a calamity was still a calamity and that she could not easily describe its form or how it would manifest. Tara stated that they needed help from Serena and that handing over the saint's tiara would allow them to proceed. With a serious expression, Theodore accused Tara of lying and claimed that she could not actually see the future. Theodore accused Tara of attempting to scam his mother out of her money. Tara reacted in shock, questioning whether Theodore was taunting her. Tara laughed and remarked that she had not expected young Master Theodore to use such abusive language, claiming it was calamity-level speech. Tara then declared that she would exorcise the demon inside Theodore. Tara used magic, releasing a powerful wind that shattered the glass inside the house. Theodore's father and mother shouted Theodore's name in panic. Theodore remained standing as the magic continued. One maid cried out in confusion as the wind persisted. Tara smiled as Theodore's mother begged her to forgive Theodore and pleaded to be taken instead. Theodore remained standing in the magic as Tara continued smiling. Theodore shouted Kevin's name. Kevin appeared behind Tara and the child, pushing the child to the ground. An object was dropped from the child. Theodore walked over, picked up the object, and smiled. Theodore's father stared in shock and identified the object as a wand of wind magic. Theodore's mother was also shocked. Tara reacted in disbelief, showing a tense expression. Theodore calmly asked Tara what was wrong and encouraged her to continue. The child called out to Tara in fear. Tara remained tense as Theodore smiled confidently and gave a thumbs up. Theodore then stated that he was hungry and asked whether he could invite his mother to join him for lunch at his house. Theodore's father reacted in confusion. Theodore added that he wanted his father to join as well, leaving Theodore's father completely stunned. Theodore's father remarked with surprise that their son had invited them for lunch for the first time and asked Serena if she had heard that. Theodore's mother reacted in confusion and, with a tense expression, hesitated in response. Theodore's father then stated that he would be borrowing Kevin for a moment. Theodore's father walked toward the old woman, who immediately showed a tense expression. Theodore's father stared directly at the old woman, causing her to become frightened. Meanwhile, Theodore grabbed his mother's hand and led her away, urging her to get going. The scene then showed the carriage crossing the bridge once again, followed by Theodore and his mother riding inside the carriage. Theodore's mother confessed that she could no longer comprehend what was happening anymore. Theodore responded by stating that more importantly, his mother had never told him that she had suffered a miscarriage. Theodore's mother showed a tense expression. Theodore asked whether his mother had gone to the hospital to see a doctor. Theodore's mother hesitated and explained that she had not gone, stating that Theodore's father had told her everything would be fine as long as she stayed with a doula. At that moment, a maid apologized for interrupting and explained that when young Master Theodore was born, everyone, including the birth mother, had been present. The maid respectfully asked who had informed Theodore's mother about the pregnancy and miscarriage. Theodore's mother answered that the information had come from Tara and Mira, adding that Mira was the handmaid who had used the wind magic item earlier. Theodore realized internally that because of this deception, the news had never reached him. Theodore's mother apologized tearfully, admitting that she had been tricked the entire time and calling herself foolish for causing so much trouble for everyone. Theodore reflected that, in the end, at least his mother had acknowledged that she had been deceived by the scammer. Theodore reasoned that with this realization, everyone could now proceed with their duties. Theodore was confident that his father would clean up the entire mess. Theodore noted that his father had already arranged an appointment for his mother and that she would be receiving a medical checkup by the afternoon. As Theodore expected, the pregnancy and miscarriage had both been lies. Theodore observed that his mother was greatly relieved upon hearing the truth. After calming down, Theodore's mother repeatedly apologized for the trouble she had caused Theodore and his father. Theodore found it difficult to tell her not to worry, acknowledging that making mistakes was natural, even within a family. After the incident, Theodore noticed that his parents became happy again and began acting like an intimate couple. Theodore hoped that they would give him a brother or a sister, or perhaps even both. Theodore then swore to himself that someday he would find a cute girl like his mother and boldly fantasized about doing anything he wanted with her. The scene then shifted to nighttime, where a butler reported to Theodore's father that a list had been compiled of people suspected of infiltrating the mistress's mansion. Theodore's father expressed surprise at how many names were on the list. The butler apologized sincerely for allowing the situation to escalate so badly while Theodore's father had been away, admitting carelessness. The butler reported that Baron Nate Gason appeared to be behind the incident. Theodore's father stated that he was unsure whether Baron Nate Gason was after the tiara or the peerage, but found it difficult to believe that a single baron could wield that much power alone. Theodore's father reasoned that Baron Nate Gason must have been working together with a higher-ranking aristocrat. Theodore's father then asked whether anything had been discovered about the magic item that had been recovered. An elderly researcher reported that the wand's safety restrictions had been released and that it had undergone crude modifications. The researcher explained that normally, when a person's magic power was exhausted, a magic tool would cease to function. However, this particular tool forcibly exchanged the user's life force for magical power and was designed to materialize events until the user died. Theodore's father asked whether Mira had been aware of how dangerous the magic item was. The researcher responded that those using it were likely never informed of its effects and that it might still have been a prototype. Despite that, the researcher emphasized that the item was extremely dangerous and powerful. The researcher speculated that if the handmaid had continued channeling magic, Theodore's father himself might have been killed. The researcher then raised another concern regarding merchants invited by the fortune teller, stating that they appeared to be selling similar magical items within their territory. The butler immediately ordered that the items be confiscated at once. Theodore's father stated that he would personally inspect the territory the following day. Theodore's father then asked whether the saint's tiara was a form of magic tool. The researcher explained that even among scholars, it had long been believed that the saint's tiara possessed special power. The researcher listed the legendary treasures of the royal family, including tiaras, necklaces, bangles, rings, earrings, and holy staffs. According to legend, the royal family had once protected saints and even saved the world. However, after years of research, it had been concluded that all of the treasures were merely ordinary ornaments. Theodore's father acknowledged this conclusion and declared that he would return the tiara to the royal family. The researcher protested briefly, while the butler reminded Theodore's father that the tiara was a family heirloom passed down from his father. Theodore's father stated that he had reason to believe the tiara was cursed and emphasized that there was no substitute for the safety of his people and family. Theodore's father added that if his own father were still alive, he would have made the same decision. The researcher reluctantly accepted the decision, and the butler acknowledged the order. Theodore's father then expressed amazement at what Theodore had accomplished, stating that Theodore had saved them this time. Theodore's father asked Kevin whether the plan had been Kevin's idea. Kevin denied this and explained that everything had been young Master Theodore's idea, stating that Theodore had seen through the situation from the beginning and that Kevin had merely followed orders. Theodore's father commented that Theodore was smart and bold, though slightly frightening. Kevin nervously added that Theodore was also a kind child who apologized whenever he made mistakes and was very patient with the staff. Kevin insisted that Theodore was not a bad child. Theodore's father laughed and stated that he did not think negatively of Theodore, adding that he never expected to see two such bright children in his lifetime. Theodore's father expressed concern that this might be a sign of future trouble. Kevin asked what Theodore's father meant by two children. Theodore's father explained that a rumor was circulating in the capital regarding the daughter of Baron Lilac. Theodore's father stated that Katrina Lilac was said to be a child prodigy. Theodore's father noted that Katrina Lilac was the same age as Theodore, only 5 years old, yet capable of solving complex factors. The butler reacted with amazement, and the researcher declared her a genius. Theodore's father stated that he was looking forward to the future and mentioned the Lady of Lilac. Kevin puffed out his cheeks and shouted that young Master Theodore could do that much as well. Everyone turned to Kevin, and the butler scolded him harshly for his disrespectful attitude. Kevin immediately apologized. Theodore's father laughed and remarked that it appeared his son had an admirer. Theodore's father then explained that this was why the royal family had their eye on the marquisate. Theodore's father stated that an announcement regarding the prince's engagement, which involved Theodore as well, would soon be made public. Theodore's father emphasized that he did not want any information about Theodore's existence to leak and wished to keep it secret for the time being. Theodore's father explained that attracting the royal family's attention too early could breed jealousy and potentially be interpreted as hostility. Theodore's father acknowledged that as Theodore grew older, hiding his identity would become more difficult, but until then, Theodore's father wanted to avoid unnecessary attention. Everyone present acknowledged the order. The scene then shifted to morning, when the butler rushed in and reported that the fortune teller had escaped from prison. The next scene showed Theodore's father and the butler at the prison. The butler explained that the fortune teller had likely seduced one of the guards to escape, and that the body of one of the guards had been found on the street. Theodore's father regretted not eliminating her earlier and expressed hope that nothing bad would happen. The scene then shifted, showing Kevin and Theodore riding together on a single horse. Theodore asked whether they were going for another round. Kevin responded that they had already completed 50 laps. Theodore thought excitedly that this was incredibly fun, and that he wanted to keep riding horses every day. Theodore reflected that he had never imagined riding a horse could be so enjoyable, and eagerly looked forward to learning how to ride one by himself. Kevin suggested that they take a break for now. Theodore reacted in disbelief. At that moment, Theodore's mother arrived and told Theodore to hold his horses, reminding him not to be too hard on them. Theodore's mother explained that both Kevin and the horse would get tired if they did not take breaks every once in a while. Theodore addressed his mother and internally admitted that while he had not considered Kevin's exhaustion, he did feel sorry for the horse if it became tired. Theodore's mother laughed and commented that Theodore's big brother had looked quite handsome, riding his horse, addressing Wendy. Wendy reacted while sitting in her mother's arms. Theodore smiled and thought that after the fortune-teller incident, his little sister had soon been born. Theodore believed that Wendy was an angel and felt that their family truly had an angel. Theodore noted that Wendy was turning one soon. Theodore's mother asked Theodore whether he could read Wendy a story if he was not too busy. Theodore eagerly agreed. The scene then shifted to Theodore reading a book. Theodore reflected on the story titled The Legend of the Saint, recognizing it as a famous ancient tale in the country. Theodore recalled that once upon a time, when the world was shrouded in darkness by the demon lord, a girl was born. This girl was blessed by God and granted the title of saint. Theodore continued recalling that she set out on a journey to save villagers from demon attacks. Along the way, she met several young people who joined her, and with their help, she defeated the demon lord and saved the world. Theodore remembered that the saint later married a young man who was a prince, and they lived happily ever after. After finishing the story, Theodore thought that it was a common folk tale and reflected that the current royal family was apparently descended from this saint. Theodore found it somewhat misleading and strange, noticing that many stories in this world featured girls as the main characters. Theodore wondered why that was. Theodore then noticed that Wendy had fallen asleep and thought she looked adorable. At that moment, Theodore's father arrived with a child and called out to Theodore. Theodore acknowledged his father. Theodore's father asked whether Theodore was knitting lace again. Theodore confirmed that he was making a handkerchief and reflected that he had become quite addicted to it ever since his mother taught him how. Theodore's father apologized for putting Theodore on the spot and asked whether Theodore would accompany him to the royal capital. Theodore reacted with surprise at the mention of the royal capital but agreed. Theodore's father then explained that since Theodore had agreed, Theodore would need a servant named Richard, who was the great-great-grandson of Sebas. Richard appeared with a sad expression. Theodore internally reacted with surprise at having a servant, finding it very aristocratic, and noted that Richard being Sebas's great-great-grandson meant Richard must be a smart child. Theodore introduced himself to Richard and extended his hand. Richard looked at Theodore's hand, extended his own, and poked Theodore's finger. Theodore showed a tense expression and wondered whether Richard was all right. Theodore speculated that perhaps Richard did not want to be a servant and reasoned that Richard might have been forced into the role despite being at an age where he should have been playing with other children. Theodore hesitantly told Richard that if Richard did not want to be his servant, Richard should not hesitate to say so, and that Theodore would be fine with it. Richard reacted in confusion. Theodore clarified that he did not intend to force Richard into being his servant if Richard did not want the role. Richard hesitated and, with tears in his eyes, apologized repeatedly, stating that he did not mind and hoped that he had not disappointed Theodore. Theodore reacted in shock and asked why Richard was crying. Richard admitted that he believed the job was not suitable for a nervous wreck like himself. Theodore explained that he had simply thought Richard did not want to be his servant and begged Richard not to cry. Theodore then called out to his father for help and questioned why his father was laughing. Theodore's father replied that he was merely amused by seeing Theodore flustered, something new to him. Theodore internally accused his father of being sadistic and questioned how his father could enjoy the situation. Theodore then shouted at Richard to stop crying, stating that Richard was his servant and should therefore stop crying. At that moment, Wendy began to cry as well. Richard continued crying, and Theodore stood there in shock. Theodore shouted in frustration and complained that Wendy was now awake. Richard, while crying, panicked and apologized repeatedly to Wendy, addressing her respectfully. Wendy continued crying, and both Wendy and Richard were crying at the same time. Theodore stood there, realizing that the situation was getting out of hand. The scene then shifted to the interior of the house, where the butler opened the door and knelt down, apologizing profusely to young Master Theodore. Theodore was shocked by this reaction. The butler declared that he would take full responsibility and would lecture Richard about his shameful behavior. Theodore told Sebas not to worry and stated that he did not really mind at all. Theodore then reflected internally that Richard had originally been raised to become his servant. Richard had been a year ahead of Theodore and had started studying earlier, but Theodore eventually overtook him. Theodore realized that they had always been compared as they grew up. Theodore acknowledged that Richard was quite capable but wondered what was going on with him. Theodore reminded himself that he was mentally a high school student, while Richard was only 6 years old. Theodore felt sorry for Richard and thought that it must be painful for Richard to be compared to someone like himself, whom Theodore viewed as a cheater. The scene then shifted to nighttime, showing Richard alone in his room. Theodore opened the door and announced his presence before entering. Richard was startled and hid himself under the blanket. Theodore asked whether Richard truly wanted to become his servant. Richard was stunned into silence. Theodore explained that he also wanted to be Richard's friend. Theodore reasoned that while Kevin was easy to get along with, there needed to be a line drawn between adults and children. Theodore expressed that it would be nice to be friends with someone around his own age. Theodore let out a light laugh. Richard remained hidden and silent. Theodore assumed that this meant refusal and grew sad. Theodore apologized for making Richard feel uncomfortable and blamed himself. As Theodore walked toward the door, Theodore asked Richard to do him a favor and tell Sebas to stop comparing the two of them. As Theodore opened the door to leave, Theodore heard a sound. Richard suddenly cried out while sobbing and clung to Theodore, causing both of them to fall to the floor. Richard tearfully declared that he wanted to become a servant like his great-grandfather and that he mainly wished to fulfill that desire by becoming a splendid servant. Still crying, Richard admitted that he felt incapable of doing anything right and believed that he might not be suited to be Theodore's servant. Even so, Richard struggled to express his feelings. Theodore reassured Richard that everything was all right and formally accepted Richard as his servant. Richard continued crying but agreed. Theodore then thought to himself that he had finally managed to work things out with Richard. Theodore believed that Richard seemed like someone who could become a good friend. The scene then shifted forward 3 days later. Theodore was sitting on his bed when Richard entered the room with a bright smile and greeted Theodore. Richard handed Theodore a sheet of paper and explained that it was Theodore's schedule for the day. Richard carefully went through the schedule, stating that at 7:15 a.m., Theodore would have breakfast for 30 minutes. From 8 a.m. to 11 a.m., Theodore would have a study session with a tutor. At 12 p.m., Theodore would have lunch for 30 minutes, followed by a 30-minute break. After that, Theodore would take a short ride to the training grounds, where sword practice would begin at 1 p.m. Richard explained that every 45 minutes, Theodore would receive a 15-minute rest, and the training session would end at 4 p.m. Richard continued listing further plans, starting at 4:15 p.m. Theodore reacted internally in shock, questioning why every single action of his day was planned down to the minute. Theodore had not expected things to turn out this way and wondered if this was what Richard meant by becoming a splendid servant. Richard then instructed Theodore to begin dressing, informing him that breakfast would be ready in 11 minutes. Theodore reluctantly agreed. Internally, Theodore wanted to point out how extreme the schedule was, but the sight of Richard's pure-hearted and motivated smile left Theodore speechless. Theodore concluded that this would be the kind of life he would be living for the time being and found the situation exhausting.
By the way, if you enjoyed the video, maybe consider liking and subscribing, pretty please?